You seem closer to the edge than I am.
I'm a pretty big fan of Yes.
Are you just trying not to lose your head?
In a roundabout kind of way.
Oh, okay. I think we're mixing musical metaphors. I'm going with the Grandmaster Flash.
I'm talking about Yes.
Well, I know you are.
So why are you talking about Grandmaster Flash?
Because you can't touch me so close to the edge. I'm just trying not to lose my head.
Hi, welcome to Comic Talk. I'm Drew.
I'm Josh.
And this is our... Well, we're doing a trade review, but we got these 5 issues right here. And it's Velvet by Brubaker and Epting. And it's awesome. And this is the first 5 issues. And bam.
Alright, so yeah, again, this is Velvet, Brubaker and Epting, and also Elizabeth Breitweiser does the coloring. She also did the coloring in the Fade Out.
Okay,
So,
awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. So this is basically about an operative, female operative, kind of a James Bond, Jason Bourne kind of thing.
She's a Jane Bond.
Yeah. And more or less, she gets framed. I'm going to try to do a quick one here. She gets framed for the murder of another operative, and she has to go on a hunt to clear her name. It's pretty standard in terms of special agent story, but done from a female perspective in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. So we get this whole everybody underestimates her, thinks she's a secretary kind of thing going on, and we get to see how super badass she really is.
She is super badass. So, what did you think overall?
I really liked it.
Good. Yeah, this is mine. I've read all of them. They're up to like 16 right now. I'm taking a little break. This is my recommendation. So I'm really glad you liked it, because I don't think you're generally a fan of like the espionage-y kind of shit.
Not really, not too much. It's not really my thing. But within that wheelhouse, I think this is a really good example of it. So, you know, it's hard not to like something just because of the genre.
Sure.
I really don't like when people say, well, I don't like insert genre. So I try to keep an open mind, and this, I think, is a good example of why you should keep an open mind, because it's not something I would normally dive into, but I really liked it.
So on that note, what do you think were the standout features that set it apart from what you would consider standard norm, what have you?
Well, I think one of the big things that really could be played as just very, I don't know, like okay, so it's a female spy, right? And you go, well, that could really just be there for eye candy, you know what I mean, kind of thing. But he doesn't play it that way. It really comes off as a well-rounded perspective of a character that you see in these sort of stories a lot, especially James Bond movies. You see these female spies, but you never get a real quality idea of what it would actually be like to be the female spy. So
right, because her approach to gaining intel and stuff like that is completely different, than she's obviously she's a spy. She's really good at it, so you get to see like the game played from that angle, I guess, which is again something that you don't really see front and center. And
I would actually say that part of what's cool about it is it's not completely different.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, it's different enough to make it interesting to see, but it's not so different as to just be playing it for the fact that she's female. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of things about being a female spy that is the same as being a dude spy.
Yeah, it's subtleties.
Right.
But again, subtlety is something that separates the good from the great.
Right, exactly. And that's really the name of the game with Brubaker and his use of female protagonists throughout his career as a comic writer. That's one of the things that really sets him apart from a lot of other writers, I think, is his continued use of female protagonists.
Yeah, he's had a ton. I mean, he wrote for, Catwoman way back in the day, and then there was that Fatale series.
Renee Montoya from Gotham Central.
Renee Montoya, Velvet. Criminal, I don't think ever really had a female front and center. But yeah, he's certainly done it a lot, and, to great acclaim. I mean, all of those series are fantastic.
But yeah, I think the thing that the through thread for all of those different things that he does is he never makes it about the fact that they're female. Mm-hmm. He just lets the fact that they're a woman inform how the story unfolds, because it would unfold differently, but it's not the central feature. Mm-hmm. Like once you establish, okay, she's a woman, it becomes, okay, now let's tell the story. Right? It doesn't dwell on this idea, and it just allows it to be, which is so hard to see, especially in the comic medium, because the comic medium is so male-centric, that oftentimes when there's a female lead, it becomes overwhelmingly just about the fact that, look, I'm writing a female, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't think that's totally assigned to, like, you know, one gender's problem, because I've seen a lot of female writers write
do the same thing.
Female characters, and yeah, it comes off the same way. And
right.
Yeah, it's just as bad. It pisses me off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The next thing about this that I think sets it apart from your normal James Bond shit is a lot of the plot twists in this I actually didn't see coming.
Right. Same.
Yeah. It's so frustrating when people try to do the whole like suspense espionage thing, and like, you know, every time that something's gonna happen, you know, it's obvious.
Right. Well, a lot of times the hat gets hung before
it even happens.
You know, you get a lot of Chekhov's guns in a lot of spy stories, and this really walks that fine line of not really hanging the gun up before. So, but that's a razor edge that you walk when you tell a spy story like that, because it can then feel unearned if you don't tell it correctly. You know what I mean?
Sure,
like
sure.
if you don't hang that gun up and point it out, like, look, there's a gun on the mantle, then when the person grabs the gun and shoots the person, you're like, well, fuck, I didn't even know there was a gun there. Like, that's just
right.
a random thing that happened. But somehow he walks that razor line between, you know, pointing out the gun and not like just waving it around in the reader's face.
Right,
you know?
right. And he also, there's a fine line between, because it is a spy thing, so they're supposed to be one step ahead of the game. And it never feels like it's to the point where she should have figured out, you know, like all this shit that she keeps like not being able to figure out, because, you know, either right before it happens or right after, she's like, okay, you know, all of this makes sense because this and this and this and this, and really pieces it together. And yeah, so she doesn't lose any intellectual credentials from the abrupt happenings.
Right. And also plot-wise, he also, again, that fine line, he never, and this is also something that you see throughout his work, he never, even when a character is supposed to be really with it and have their shit together, they're not godlike in their deductive abilities, right? Mm-hmm. They don't do the Adam West, you know, oh, an R is for Robin, and you know what I mean? And like going through these strange deductive, nonsensical concepts, or knowing things that they shouldn't know just because, well, they're a super spy.
With it, right?
They're like an amazing spy, so of course they knew that. You know, he doesn't go that route either. He finds these great middle through lines to keep it taut and without, you know, and keeping the characters feeling like they're good spies and they know what they're doing, but without making it feel ridiculous either.
Sure. I think human was probably the good adjective for that. And because there's just some shit that like she couldn't have known.
Right.
You know, and a lot of the times, like, even though she's like one step behind, like, he's put you in a place where you're even one step behind that.
Right.
You know, so very, very well crafted in that regard.
And in terms of like the actual non-plot writing, I feel like this is pretty high in terms of like dialogue and quality of
a lot of it's monologue
of the writing. Right, there's a lot of monologuing happening, which I think is maybe, in my opinion, the weakest part of this.
Really?
Yeah, I felt like this kind of story could probably do well with a little bit more of a fade out kind of feel, where it's a lot more between the characters talking to each other.
Fade out was a lot of
there was
as well.
It's true. I guess maybe that's not the best example, but I feel like Brubaker in general relies really heavily on monologue, and it makes sense for a good deal of it, but sometimes I did feel like I could have done with just more people actually talking to each other about this stuff, maybe.
I enjoyed it. Maybe he doesn't trust this artist as much as Phillips.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's probably part of it. He hasn't worked with this guy nearly as much as he's worked with Phillips, so he has to communicate things just a little bit more. And I'm not saying it's bad in that regards. It's just something that I noticed. I felt like it was a little monologue heavy to the point of feeling, just for Brubaker standard, just a little bit heavy-handed.
Yeah, I could see certain points where I felt like I was being talked to instead of just that the character was like thoughts in their head, or just like talking.
Yeah.
I happened to be there.
Yeah, that's precisely it. Yeah, that's actually exactly what the issue is, and it's
the issue.
and again, that's more me looking for things
to complain about,
to talk about than really a huge complaint. It's just a comparison of other works of the genre or of this style. I feel like he relies so heavily there that somebody who may not like the monologue-y style might get a little bogged down in it.
One last point I had about this, I don't know if you have any other points you want to make before we get to the art, but I enjoy that, it's very easy to tell a spy story and make it all seem glamorous and stuff, but he really does a good job showing you why it sucks. Like every opportunity that he gets, which is not really something I see in really any other piece of the genre that I've seen. Like it's always about looking like super cool instead of, oh yeah, this one time I had to kill my fucking husband because of the game. Right.
Yeah, that was actually the last point I was going to have about this, is that it really pulls away the sheen of it. And it shows you how it looks, right? He does this dual thing where he shows you what it feels like and looks like from the outside, but then kind of lifts up the rock.
Yeah.
And shows you like what's underneath it, the drinking and the terrible backstabbing and the not being able to trust people.
It's kind of a manic depiction in that way. Like it either looks super fucking tight or like, man, I'm glad that's not my life.
Right. And a lot of, again though, then we get the monologuiness where that's a lot of what she has to say too, which I think is what I'm getting at here, is that like it's a little heavy-handed with it. Like I can see that that's the way it is because you're showing me that already.
Well, right, but I also like when people, or when characters, I get to see them work through their problems and rationalize them and stuff like that. So in that regard, I do enjoy, people talking about why things suck sometimes.
Yeah, this is really, it's like a noir take on...
Imagine that.
Yeah, big surprise, right? It's a noir spy story. So it's, spy noir instead of, the more standard detective noir.
Sure.
And what was the... you're right. Almost everything I've read of his has been very noir heavy, isn't it? It's really kind of his wheelhouse, huh?
I mean, Dead Boy Detectives wasn't really, and then that run on Authority wasn't really.
Which I have not read either of those.
But everything else, pretty much, that I've read. I mean, Catwoman was pretty noir.
Right.
And Fade Out was, come on.
Right. And that's really where all that heavy monologuing comes from, is just that noir background that he's so comfortable in. All in all, man, I liked it a lot. I'm not, it was a lot of fun to read, and I read it pretty fast, too. Like, I really burned through it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I read a bunch of it, and then I stopped reading it for a while because I was like, I need bigger chunks of story than this. But then... Yeah, the second time I read it through, I read like fucking 6 issues in a row, and then like went to bed and woke up and read like 5 in a row. Yeah, awesome. So artwork, we have mentioned Epting prior to this and said that he wasn't, or Brubaker wasn't as comfortable working with him, possibly. What did you think about the artwork?
I mean, I like the art, and I think it suits this story well. It's all very clear and easy to understand. All the characterizations are really good. But it maybe doesn't have quite the depth of expression as I'm used to with other people that have worked with Brubaker.
Sure. I did enjoy, you mentioned that they had a different colorist on this. I don't see her on the front of any issues. Are you sure about that?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, the color palette chosen for this, I think, really added a cool dimension that I hadn't seen from any of like the Phillips work, which I mean, given that's not Phillips' style, but it was cool in that regard to see someone else's take on the same or a very similar mood and setting kind of deal.
Well, you know, I think part of it, though, is this has kind of a similar thing as a lot of Alex Ross work, which no artist is going to be upset to be compared to Alex Ross, I don't think. But there is a certain staticness to the imagery in the way that a lot of Alex Ross work is, where it doesn't look like it's in motion most of the time. Does that?
Yeah, it's like freeze frame.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's there's no fluidity to it, and the movement from panel to panel is not very fluid. It's more like storyboarding for like a film. It's like, here's the shot and here's the next shot and here, and it doesn't really feel particularly graceful in a lot of ways to me. But
but I think a lot of that is appropriate, again, just because of like, the amount of monologue and stuff like that. If it seemed like a monologue while she was like busy like navigating something or whatever, I mean, it feels a bit unnatural sometimes. It feels more, I mean, I don't want to say literary because it's like a higher concept or whatever, but it feels more like the act of reading to have this sort of like static images, like,
Right. Yeah, I agree. And it's almost like, you know how a lot of older noir and Western, and a lot of the Pulp Fiction books from, say, the 30s through maybe the 60s would, at the beginning of each chapter, there'd be a picture, right, that sort of encapsulates what's coming.
Sure.
And it feels almost like that to me in a lot of ways, where each image is more of a full attempt to kind of tell you what's happening throughout a time period, and then the next image is maybe not directly the moment after, even though in a lot of cases that is the case. Like it's supposed to be tick, 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 tick through the image, but it doesn't always come off that way, and I think that's just that static nature of how this artist works. It seems like maybe he's doing a lot more reference work, which is also a thing with Alex Ross, which leads to those more static images, because you're asking someone, okay, now will you pose as if you're about to hit that guy?
Right.
And so they stand there and then they take a picture, you know what I mean, and then draw that picture, but it leads to less emotive imagery, I think. But that more static, calmer thing works with it, I think, in a way, because it makes it less actiony and more that static feel. Like you said, it makes it more literary, because you're spending more time like trying to interpret the words into the motion.
I think it also aids in the noir feel of it as well. It's that whole like smoky office and narrator. Yeah,
I agree.
All right, last points. Who would you recommend this to?
Anybody that likes Brubaker.
Yeah.
If you're into spy stuff, if
you're not,
probably, but definitely people into anything that's spy-like at all.
But you're not into spy-like stuff. But you're into Brubaker, and
that's true. Yeah. Literary people looking for a little bit more of a literary slant in the writing.
Yeah. A meaty story.
Yeah, a lot more self-reflection. There's a lot of reflection in here of character. So, that sort of thing. If that's your cup of tea, this is.
This is also your cup of tea. And they are British, so that is appropriate. Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, podcast, YouTube. Later.